Marian's trunk struck the gravel just as the Duke stepped from the darkened archway. The brass corners rang against the stones, sharp enough to startle a pair of roosting pigeons from the eaves, and Marian Bell drew one gloved hand tighter around the leather handle. Behind her, Brackenmere Hall slept beneath shuttered windows and black chimneys. Ahead, the eastern road lay pale beneath the last quarter of the moon, its ruts silvered with frost and its hedges breathing the bitter scent of wet hawthorn. The man beneath the archway did not move. His greatcoat was buttoned to the throat, his boots were dark with mud, and the flame in the wall lantern cut one side of his face into bronze while leaving the other in shadow. "You are earlier than I expected," said Peregrine Ashcombe, Duke of Westridge. Marian's fingers stopped upon the trunk handle. Somewhere beyond the stable wall, a horse stamped and blew into the cold. "You expected me?" "I expected you to choose the servants' gate." His gaze dropped to the small trunk, then returned to her face. "You leave every room by the door least likely to be watched." The iron latch behind Marian clicked as the wind pressed it against the stone. She had planned the hour, the route, the 6-mile walk to the coaching inn, and the exact number of shillings she could spare for a seat on the Dover mail. She had extinguished her candle before midnight, waited until the last footman crossed the upper passage, and wrapped the wheels of her trunk in strips torn from an old petticoat so they would not rattle over the floorboards. No one at Brackenmere Hall knew the color of her eyes without first being reminded of her name. Yet the Duke stood between her and the road as though he had read every line of her plan. "Please step aside, Your Grace." Her breath clouded between them. "I have no wish to make a scene." "Neither have I." He shifted one pace, not enough to bar the gate, only enough for the lantern to reveal a folded paper in his bare hand. "That is why I came alone." Marian looked toward the sleeping house. No bell rang. No maid called from a window. The silence was complete except for the slow drip of water from the arch and the thin creak of leather as the Duke closed his fingers around the paper. "You may go," he said. "I will not command you back into that house. But before you carry that trunk 6 miles in shoes with split soles, you will hear what I have to offer." Marian's jaw set. "Charity. Employment. From a man who has never spoken 10 sentences to me. We have spoken 14. A faint line appeared beside his mouth. "I remember each one." The cold traveled through the worn leather of Marian's boots and climbed her ankles. She looked at him again, more carefully this time, and the question she had buried beneath 3 weeks of silence rose like a hand beneath water. How much had he seen? 3 weeks earlier, the west drawing-room at Brackenmere had smelled of hot wax, orange peel, and damp wool drying before the fire. Rain tapped the tall windows with the quick, persistent fingers of a seamstress, while 30 guests spoke over one another beneath a ceiling painted with nymphs and pale blue clouds. Lady Brackenmere had ordered a private concert to honor the Duke of Westridge, though everyone in the county knew the true purpose was to display her daughter, Miss Lavinia Brackenmere, beneath the most flattering candlelight available in Kent. Marian stood behind the final row of chairs with a bundle of copied music pressed to her bodice. Her gown was brown bombazine, plain at the cuffs and polished at the elbows from years of wear. A narrow ribbon held back her dark hair. No jewels caught the light at her throat. She had spent the afternoon trimming lamps, copying an Italian duet whose original pages had been stained with chocolate, and persuading the temperamental tenor from London that Lady Brackenmere's neglected pianoforte would not collapse beneath him. Now the room shimmered with silk, diamonds, and expectation. Lavinia sat at the instrument in white satin threaded with seed pearls. She lifted her hands, smiled toward the Duke, and struck the first chord. The left pedal snapped. A dry crack sounded beneath the music, followed by a wooden clatter. Lavinia's smile froze. The tenor inhaled. Lady Brackenmere's fan stopped halfway to her cheek. Before the silence could widen, Marian crossed the carpet. The pile was thick beneath her thin soles, the heat of 100 candles pressed against her face. She knelt without speaking, reached beneath the pianoforte, and found the broken linkage hanging loose. "Continue with the upper part," she murmured to Lavinia. "Do not use the pedal." Lavinia's fingers hovered. I cannot. You can. Marian removed the narrow black ribbon from her own sleeve, looped it through the brass fitting, and pulled the pieces together with a sailor's knot her father had taught her before his last voyage. The tenor cleared his throat and began the opening line alone. Marian tightened the knot, tested it once, and rose as Lavinia entered on the next measure. Conversation resumed in soft waves. Lady Brackenmere's fan began to move. Marian returned to the rear of the room carrying the broken splinter in her palm. No one applauded her. No one turned. Almost no one. Across the aisle, the Duke of Westridge watched over the rim of an untouched wineglass. He was 34, broad-shouldered, and still enough to make the restless men around him appear badly trained. His dark hair had been brushed straight back from a high brow, and a narrow scar ran from the corner of his left temple into his hairline. Society attributed the scar to a hunting accident. The servants whispered that it came from a saber near Salamanca. Marian had no interest in either story. She lowered her eyes and moved toward the side door. Miss Bell, the Duke said. His voice did not rise, yet it reached her through the music. Marian stopped with her hand upon the brass knob. Several ladies looked past her, searching for the woman he had addressed. Your Grace. The knot. His gaze rested on the strip of ribbon beneath the pianoforte. It will hold through the final movement. If Miss Brackenmere does not stamp upon the pedal. A cough sounded from the second row. The Duke's mouth shifted by a fraction. And if she does? Then the instrument will expose her. Marian opened the door. The corridor beyond smelled of stone dust and cooling tallow. Most instruments do, in time. She stepped out before he could answer. The latch settled softly behind her. Peregrine kept the wineglass lifted, but he no longer watched the performance. He watched the closed door through which Marian had vanished. That night, he saw Marian in the cold servants' passage give a shivering page the broth Lady Brackenmere's aunt had refused. Grease smoke from the rushlight clung to the stone, and steam clouded the silver cover as she added her own heel of bread. The boy fled toward the still room. Marian continued upstairs carrying an empty tray, unaware that Peregrine stood behind the half-open baize door until her steps faded. The following morning, he found her in the orangery while the house party hunted. Sunlight flashed on wet glass overhead, and the air held the green, bitter fragrance of crushed leaves. Marian stood on a low stool tying a split branch to a cane. Her fingertips were stained with soil. Do you repair everything at Brackenmere? He asked. She did not start. Only what will worsen if ignored. That must occupy every hour. Most of them. She stepped down, brushed earth from her skirt, and reached for the watering pot. You did not join the hunt, Your Grace. Neither did you. I was not invited. I was. He glanced through the misted panes toward the distant flash of redcoats crossing the lower field. Hounds bayed beyond the yew hedge, their voices softened by half a mile of damp air. That is why my absence is useful. Marian poured water around the roots. And mine is not noticed. I noticed it. The water struck the terracotta pot with a hollow patter. Her hand remained steady, but one drop ran over the rim and darkened the toe of her shoe. Then you have too little to occupy you. On the contrary. Peregrine took the watering pot from her before she could protest and set it on the tiled floor. The metal handle left a cold line of moisture across his glove. I have spent 2 days surrounded by people determined to be seen. You are the only person determined not to be. Marian looked up. Close at hand, his eyes were not black as they appeared across a ballroom. They were gray, the color of flint beneath rain. Some of us are paid to remain outside the picture, Your Grace. Who pays you? Lady Brackenmere. For what work? Whatever work has been forgotten until the instant it becomes urgent. A gust rattled the glass roof. The orange leaves stirred, releasing a sharper scent into the warm air. Peregrine studied the mended branch. And when you are forgotten, the work is usually finished. Marian bent to lift the pot. He let her take it. Good day, Your Grace. She walked the length of the orangery, passed through the narrow door, and disappeared into white morning light. He watched the door swing once upon its hinge. By the end of that week, Peregrine had begun to measure the house by Marian's departures. She left the breakfast room when the gentlemen unfolded their newspapers. She left the terrace when Lavinia arrived with her sketchbook. She left the library whenever conversation turned toward marriage settlements, fortunes, or the requirements of a duchess. Each time, she carried something that belonged to another person, a shawl, a letter, a tray, a book, a basket of keys. Each time, the room continued as though it had lost no one at all. And each time, the Duke's gaze followed her to the threshold. On the 9th morning, Marian found a sealed note beside Lady Brackenmere's chocolate cup. The breakfast room glowed with weak sun reflected from silver dishes, and the grate smelled of coal smoke and scorched toast. Lady Brackenmere slit the seal with a butter knife, read 3 lines, and clicked her tongue. The roofing estimate from Little Fallow is intolerable. £40 to mend a schoolroom no larger than my dressing chamber. Marian set down the cream jug. The eastern rafters are rotten, my lady. Rain has reached the plaster above the children's benches. Then the children may sit on the western side. There are 53 of them. Country children are narrow. Lavinia laughed into her napkin. Across the table, Peregrine lowered the newspaper enough to reveal his eyes. Marian took the estimate, unfolded it, and ran her thumb over the rough paper. The school at Little Fallow belonged to Lady Brackenmere's estate, though the mistress had not visited it in 6 years. Marian had gone there the previous spring to deliver Bibles and found a room that smelled of mildew, chalk, and wet wool, with daylight showing through a crack 2 feet long. The mason offers to reuse the sound tiles, she said. The price includes 2 new beams and lime plaster. Lady Brackenmere stirred chocolate until the spoon struck the cup in bright, irritated taps. Then he may wait until summer. It is October. Precisely. The rain has already begun. Another season cannot make the roof much wetter. Marian folded the estimate. A grain of soot drifted from the chimney and landed upon the white cloth between them. No, my lady. It can only bring it down. The spoon stopped. Lavinia's chair creaked as she leaned back. Peregrine's newspaper did not move. Lady Brackenmere looked at Marian as one might look at a clock that had begun to speak. You forget yourself. Marian placed the paper beside the cup. I remembered the children. And I remember who employs you. The grate gave a small collapse, sending a breath of hot ash across the fender. Marian stood still while Lady Brackenmere reached for the toast rack. Write to the mason, the Countess said. Tell him £25. If he refuses, we shall find a more grateful man. Yes, my lady. Marian gathered the correspondence and left through the green door beside the sideboard. Peregrine folded his newspaper. The school stands on your northern road, he asked. Lady Brackenmere brightened at once. A dreary little place. You cannot imagine why villagers require so many books. I can imagine why they require a roof. His chair slid over the carpet with a low rasp. I intend to ride there. Now. Lavinia touched the pearl at her throat. The ground is sodden. Then I shall discover whether country children are narrow enough to avoid the rain. He left by the same green door. Marian was halfway down the passage, the packet of letters beneath her arm, when his steps sounded behind her. The stone flags were cold through her shoes, rosemary from the kitchen garden drifted through an open casement. Miss Bell. She stopped. If you mean to rebuke me, Your Grace, Lady Brackenmere has already performed the office. I mean to ask how far it is to Little Fallow. 2 miles by the North Lane. You have been there? Yes. You will show me. I have letters to copy. They can wait 1 hour. Lady Brackenmere's letters do not wait for dukes. Peregrine glanced at the top sheet. One is an invitation to a woman already sleeping beneath this roof. Marian looked down. The first letter was indeed addressed to Lady Alton, whose pug had occupied the blue guest room since Monday. The Countess prefers ceremony. I prefer sound roofs. He opened the outer door. Cold air entered, carrying the smell of horses and fallen leaves. Bring your cloak. Marian should have refused. Instead, she placed the letters on the hall table, took her dark wool cloak from a peg, and followed him to the stable yard. They rode in an open gig, its wheels spraying brown water while harness bells chimed beneath the low sky. Little Fallow School smelled of damp slate, smoke, and wool mittens. 53 children recited multiplication tables around 3 basins catching rain. As the schoolmistress curtsied, plaster broke from the ceiling. Peregrine looked at Marian. Country children are narrow, she said. His laugh startled the smallest pupils. Before sunset, he had pledged the full £40 and ordered his carpenter to inspect the adjoining cottages. On the return road, Marian listed dry coal, 6 panes of glass, primer books, and a covered pump. He listened without interruption. At Brackenmere, Lavinia waited beneath the portico in a riding habit the color of bluebells, though she had not ridden. The stone smelled of rain and the lamps hissed in the wind. Her gaze moved from the mud on Marian's hem to the Duke's hand as he helped Marian down from the gig. Mamma has been searching everywhere, she said. The invitations remain unfinished. Then Miss Bell has been missed at last, Peregrine replied. Lavinia's smile thinned. Marian removed her hand from his. Only because the work stopped. She walked into the hall. Peregrine watched her cross the black and white marble and pass through the door to the east passage. Lavinia watched him watching. From that afternoon, the air around Marian changed. Conversations ceased when she entered the sewing room. Lavinia began requiring her presence for every trivial errand, then dismissing her the moment the Duke appeared. Lady Brackenmere rang for her before dawn to revise menus and after midnight to copy letters that could have waited a week. Marian's candle burned shorter each night. Wax collected in pale ridges upon the brass stick, and the room beneath the eaves grew colder as October pressed against the roof. Peregrine saw the bruised shadows deepen beneath her eyes. He saw her flex cramped fingers behind her back after addressing invitations for 4 hours. He saw her surrender her place near the fire when an elderly guest complained of a draught, then remained beside the window while sleet scratched the glass. He did not offer pity. He began setting obstacles in the path of those who used her carelessly. When Lady Brackenmere ordered Marian into the rain, the Duke's groom appeared with a saddled mare. When Lavinia sent her hunting for a misplaced bracelet, Peregrine produced it before Marian reached the door. A late tray began arriving with hot food instead of scraps. Marian returned the coffee untouched, tea appeared the next night. She drank it. Neither mentioned these quiet contests, but the silence between them acquired weight. At dinner on the 12th night, Peregrine asked Marian whether the North Tenant cottages at Westridge had the same failures as Little Fallow. She stood behind Lady Brackenmere's chair, holding a fresh plate while steam from the venison clouded her face. I have never seen your cottages, Your Grace. Then speak generally. Generally, great estates fail in small places. Forks paused along the table. Roofs, pumps, flues, wages paid 3 days late. A landlord sees an annual account. A mother sees water beneath her child's bed. Peregrine set down his knife. Would you inspect such places if paid to do so? Lady Brackenmere's hand tightened around her wineglass. Marian heard the faint squeak of damp crystal beneath kid leather. I am already employed. So you remind me. And so her ladyship may remind you, Lady Brackenmere said, smiling without showing her teeth. Marian has been with us for 4 years. She is nearly one of the family. The word nearly landed with the soft precision of a pin. How fortunate, Peregrine said. Marian lifted the plate and moved away. That night, as the house settled into the smell of banked fires and extinguished candles, Lady Brackenmere summoned Marian to the yellow dressing room. The Countess sat before a mirror while her maid brushed powder from her hair. Lavender water sharpened the warm air, and logs cracked behind a brass fender. Lavinia stood at the window in a wrapper of white muslin, twisting the curtain fringe around one finger. "Close the door," Lady Brackenmere said. Marian obeyed. "You have mistaken his Grace's curiosity for regard." The maid's brush continued its slow stroke. Marian looked at the Countess's reflection. "I have mistaken nothing. Men like Westridge amuse themselves by studying what is beneath them. A beetle, a tenant, a woman without connections. It does not elevate the object. I did not ask to be elevated." Lavinia turned from the glass. "You rode alone with him. To a school with 53 witnesses. You answer him as though you are his equal. He asks questions as though he wants answers." Lady Brackenmere lifted one hand. The maid stopped brushing. In the quiet, rainwater gurgled through the downpipe outside. "At the end of this gathering, you will go to my sister in Northumberland. She requires a companion. The house is secluded, the society limited, and you will be spared further confusion about your place." Marian's nails pressed into her palms. Lady Brackenmere's sister lived near the Cheviot Hills, 40 miles from the nearest town, and had buried 3 companions in 7 years. "What wages does she offer?" "You should be grateful for a home." "Then none." "Your food and clothing, I have earned my food and clothing here." The Countess turned upon the stool. Candlelight caught the powder in the lines beside her nose. "You have grown impertinent." "I have grown accurate." Lavinia's breath hissed between her teeth. Lady Brackenmere rose. "You will leave for Northumberland on Monday." "I shall write the reference myself." Marian glanced toward the escritoire. A sheet lay open beneath the sand shaker. She could read only the final line upside down, prone to presumption when treated above her station. "No," Marian said. The maid dropped the brush. It struck the carpet with a muffled thump. "What did you say?" "I said no." Marian crossed to the escritoire, lifted the 4 years of wages recorded in her own narrow hand, and laid one finger upon the unpaid quarter. "You owe me £9 and 10 shillings. Pay it, and I will depart tomorrow. Keep it, and I will depart before dawn." Lady Brackenmere's face became very still. "Without a reference, no respectable household will receive you. Then I shall seek work in a school. I will write to every school within 50 miles. Marian folded the account sheet once and placed it beside the inkstand. The paper made a dry, final sound. "Then I shall walk 51. She curtsied. "Good night, my lady." As Marian crossed the upper gallery, the house lay blue and cold beneath the moon. A clock below struck 1, each note vibrating through the oak rail beneath her hand. At the far end, a man stood half concealed by a carved screen. Peregrine had heard only the closing words through the dressing-room door. He saw the account paper in Marian's hand, the bloodless line around her mouth, and the way she paused outside her own room to steady a candle whose flame had begun to shake. She entered and closed the door. He remained in the gallery until the clock's last vibration died. Then he went downstairs, called for his boots, and sent his valet to wake the groom. Before 4, he had ridden 12 miles to Westridge House, opened the locked cabinet in his study, and taken out the survey reports his steward had been softening for 2 years. He read them while cold dawn gathered at the windows. At the bottom of the 3rd page, beside a notation about tenant chimneys, he wrote a name he had never before written, Miss Marian Bell. By 5, he was riding back to Brackenmere. By 6:15, he stood beneath the servants' archway with a folded offer in his hand. And when Marian's trunk struck the gravel, he was waiting. The frost had whitened the gravel since Marian first stepped through the gate. Peregrine held out the folded paper. Westridge contains 11 villages, 3 charity schools, 2 almshouses, and more cottages than my steward admits require repair. I want an account written by someone who notices what others agree not to see. Marian did not take it. The lantern flame made a small blue tongue at its base, hot oil and cold iron scented the archway. You prepared employment between midnight and dawn. I prepared the terms. The employment has existed for years. I lacked the proper person. And now, by a remarkable accident, the proper person happens to be walking away without a reference. There is nothing accidental in my being here. He lowered the paper, leaving the road clear at his side. Nor will I pretend there is. I have watched you for 3 weeks. I watched you mend a pianoforte without asking for praise, feed a page from a tray meant for a woman who would not eat, repair an orange branch, and tell a countess that children cannot be made narrow enough to avoid a leaking roof. I have watched this house spend you by the teaspoon. Marian's grip tightened on the trunk until the handle creaked. That does not give you a claim upon me. No, the answer came without pause. It gives me information. He extended the paper again. 1 month. 20 guineas. A room in the West Lodge, not beneath my roof. Mrs. Hester Lane, the widow of my former chaplain, will reside there with you. You will travel with a maid and submit your findings directly to me. No steward may alter a word. At the end of the month, you may leave with my reference and your wages whether I approve of your conclusions or not. A rook called from the bare elms beyond the wall. Marian looked at the road, then at the folded offer. 20 guineas is excessive. So is rot. You would pay a man half that. A man would tell me my roofs are excellent. You cannot know what I would tell you. I know precisely what you would tell me. What? Peregrine's eyes held hers in the lantern light. The truth, with no regard for whether I enjoy it. The corners of the paper stirred in the wind. Marian took it at last. The writing was firm, black, and hurried only in the final lines. She read every clause twice. I require 5 guineas in advance. Agreed. The maid is to be chosen by Mrs. Lane, not your housekeeper. Agreed. I decide which cottages are entered and which tenants are questioned. Your steward receives no notice beforehand. Peregrine's brows lifted. You intend an ambush. I intend accuracy. Agreed. Marian drew a small pencil from her reticule, rested the paper upon the top of her trunk, and added one final sentence. Either party may end the engagement upon 24 hours' notice, without forfeiture of wages already earned. She handed it back. Sign beneath that. Peregrine read the line. The wind pushed his greatcoat against his legs. Somewhere in the yard, a chain struck a post with a hollow clang. You expect to flee me? I expect always to know where the door is. He took the pencil and signed. Then keep the key. He moved completely aside. The road opened before her. Marian stared at it. She had expected persuasion, command, perhaps the casual exercise of rank. Instead, he had placed his name beneath her escape clause. My carriage is beyond the lower wall, he said. It bears no crest. It will take you to the West Lodge if you accept, or to the Dover coach if you do not. And if I walk? I shall admire your obstinacy while arranging for my groom to follow far enough behind that you do not see him. Her eyes narrowed. That is not keeping the door open. No. That is preventing a woman carrying a trunk before sunrise from being robbed on my cousin's road. I am capable of respecting your will and disliking unnecessary danger at the same time. For the first time that morning, Marian's mouth threatened to move. She looked down before the movement became a smile. The West Lodge, she said. Peregrine bent, lifted the trunk as though it contained linen rather than 4 years of her life, and carried it through the arch. The plain carriage waited beneath dripping beeches. Its interior smelled of clean straw, leather, and the hot brick wrapped in flannel at her feet. Mrs. Lane sat opposite in a plum-colored bonnet, broad awake and entirely unimpressed by Dukes. "I was told you dislike fuss," the widow said as Marian entered. "So do I. We shall suit." Peregrine set the trunk behind the driver. When he returned to the window, Marian had unfolded the contract again. "How did you know I would leave this morning?" she asked. He rested one hand against the carriage frame. Frost melted into dark beads upon his sleeve. "I did not know the morning. But you knew I would leave. You had begun looking at every doorway before you entered a room." His gaze moved to the sleeping house behind her. "I knew you were measuring the distance." The carriage jolted forward. Marian looked back once. Peregrine stood in the road with the lantern behind him, growing smaller between the bare hedges. He did not wave. He only watched until the turnpike bend took her from sight. Westridge was not a palace disguised as comfort. It was a working estate, broad and wind-cut, with chalk hills to the north and salt marshes silvering the southern horizon. The West Lodge consisted of 4 warm rooms above a disused gatehouse. Its floors were scrubbed pine, its curtains plain green serge, and its kitchen smelled of onions, beeswax, and the apple logs Mrs. Lane fed to the range. Marian slept for 4 hours beneath a wool blanket, woke to the tolling of the estate chapel bell, and began work before dinner. For 27 days, she crossed fields, climbed stairs, opened cupboards, and asked questions no ducal visitor had asked. She found rust-colored water, cracked flues blackening children's blankets, empty school benches, and a widow charged the same fee twice. Wet thatch scratched beneath her palm, lime dust turned bitter on her tongue, loom shuttles clacked through cold rooms while chapel bells crossed the hills at noon. Peregrine did not accompany her every day. That would have changed the answers. He appeared without warning at the edge of fields, in stable yards, or beneath the low lintel of a cottage where his height forced him to bow. He listened while tenants spoke to Marian and looked at him only when she asked a question he did not wish to answer. "Why has the south well not been lined?" she demanded one afternoon. They stood beside a circular pit veined with green moss. A rope groaned over the wooden windlass, and the air smelled of wet stone and manure from the neighboring byre. "My steward said the water was sound." "Taste it." Peregrine took the ladle from a child, drank, and spat into the grass. The child covered a laugh with both hands. Marian wrote in her notebook. "Line the well." "Yes, Miss Bell." "Before the frost deepens." "Yes, Miss Bell." The child laughed openly. Peregrine ordered the work before sunset. On another day, Marian entered the weaving school and found the windows nailed shut to keep out drafts. 30 girls worked beneath oil lamps while dust floated in the heated air and wool fibers caught in their throats. She took a poker from the stove, pried the first sash open, and let November wind slice through the room. The mistress protested. Peregrine arrived as Marian stood upon a bench forcing the second window. "Your Grace," the mistress cried, "Miss Bell will chill them all." Marian jumped down. "They are already breathing lint." Peregrine ran one finger across the sill, grey fibers clung to his glove. "Open every window for 10 minutes each hour," he said. "And order 2 roof vents." Marian capped her ink. "3. 3, he amended. The mistress stared from one to the other. "Who is in authority here?" "At present?" Peregrine looked at Marian. "The person who noticed the air." By the 3rd week, workmen crossed the estate with ladders and carts of tile. Fresh lime whitened cottage walls. The repaired pump gave clear water with a bright iron splash. Children carried dry coal into Little Fallow School, and the smell of mildew began to yield to chalk and wood smoke. Marian's report grew to 81 pages. Peregrine read each page at night in the library at Westridge House, where cedar logs burned beneath a carved mantel and rain whispered against the long windows. Her sentences spared him nothing. His steward had concealed expenses. His bailiff had favored tenants who bought ale from his brother. The almshouse roof had been patched with rotten board. Marian wrote the facts without ornament and ended each section with a remedy, a cost, and the name of the person who would answer if it failed. Peregrine began leaving questions in the margins. Why this mason? Why 2 pumps? Why increase the schoolmistress's coal allowance? Marian answered beneath them. Because the first mason is cheap only when no one inspects his work. Because 1 pump serves 87 persons and 21 cattle. Because ink freezes in an unheated schoolroom. Their argument traveled back and forth in black lines. The margins narrowed. The questions changed. What would you build if the old granary were yours? Marian stared at that line for a long time while the West Lodge clock ticked through the quiet. She wrote, a school for older girls who have outgrown primers but are not yet placed in service. Arithmetic, accounts, plain sewing, letter writing, and enough law to recognize a dishonest agreement. The next evening, a second question waited. What would it cost? She answered. The following morning, Peregrine took her to the granary. It stood beside the river, empty except for broken sacks and the sweet, dry smell of old wheat. Sunlight entered through slits in the wall, laying gold bars across the dust. Begin in January, he said. Marian looked at the vast beams overhead. You have not seen my final report. I have seen 63 pages. There are 18 more. Will they persuade me that teaching girls arithmetic is unwise? No, then begin. As what? Mistress of the Westridge School for Girls. The river struck the mill race outside with a steady roar. Marian placed her notebook upon an overturned barrel. For 1 month. For as long as the work remains worth doing. Under your authority. Under a trust funded from the estate. With a committee of men who will close it the first time a father complains that his daughter can add his debts. You may choose 2 women to sit with the trustees. And the salary? Name it. Marian studied him across the dusty light. You have been planning this. Since the Orangery. Before I left Brackenmere. Yes. You might have asked me. You were employed. You might have spoken. You left every time I approached. And you watched. Yes. The single word filled the granary more completely than the river. Peregrine stepped nearer, boots grinding wheat husks against the boards. I watched because you were the only person in that house who did not arrange herself for my notice. I watched because every room changed after you departed, though no one understood why. I watched because you saw weakness and moved toward it instead of away. Marian's fingers rested upon the edge of the barrel. Dust warmed beneath the sunlight, cold air flowed through the wall slits and lifted one loose strand of hair against her cheek. That is not a reason to build a school. No, his eyes lowered briefly to her mouth, then returned to her gaze. It is only the reason I wanted you to build it. And the other reason? A cart rattled over the bridge outside. Peregrine did not answer at once. The other reason, he said, is not one I will use to purchase your agreement. Before Marian could speak, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. The granary door swung open, and the steward entered with his hat in both hands. Your Grace, Lady Brackenmere's carriage has arrived at the house. Marian's fingertips went cold against the wood. Peregrine's face hardened by a degree. Did she state her business? She states that Miss Bell stole private correspondence before abandoning her post. The river roared through the mill race. Marian closed her notebook. Then let us hear precisely what she thinks no one saw. Lady Brackenmere waited in the red saloon beneath a portrait of Peregrine's grandfather in parliamentary robes. The room smelled of damp fur, roses forced in a hothouse, and the sharp smoke of a newly lit fire. Lavinia stood beside the mantel in a travelling cloak trimmed with swansdown. 2 county gentlemen who had arrived to discuss the school roof remained near the windows, trapped by etiquette and openly listening. Marian entered with her notebook beneath one arm. Peregrine followed but stopped near the door. He did not offer her his hand or take the chair at the head of the room. Lady Brackenmere looked at Marian's plain wool gown, then at the ink upon her fingers. There you are. You will return my letters immediately. Which letters? My correspondence with Lady Alton concerning Lavinia's prospects. Those letters are in the locked escritoire of the yellow dressing-room. The key vanished when you did. Marian reached into her reticule and placed a small brass key upon the table. It struck the polished wood with a clear click. I left it with your housekeeper. She returned it to me yesterday by post because she found it in the wrong drawer. Lady Brackenmere's nostrils whitened. You expect us to accept that convenient tale? No. I expect you to read the housekeeper's note. Marian laid a folded sheet beside the key. Wax crackled as Lady Brackenmere opened it. Lavinia moved first. You copied Mamma's private letter to the Canterbury school. The one warning them of your conduct. Marian's eyes shifted to her. The fire snapped behind the grate. I did not know such a letter existed. Do not pretend. Lavinia's voice rose. They would have taken you until Mamma explained how you pursued the Duke. Peregrine's hand closed upon the back of a chair, but Marian spoke before he could. Your mother threatened to write to every school within 50 miles. I believed it anger. You have now confirmed it was action. Lady Brackenmere crushed the housekeeper's note in one fist. I protected respectable households. You protected your daughter from a competition I never entered. The rose scent turned cloying in the heated room. Marian opened her notebook and removed a narrow sheet. This is the inventory I made before leaving: 3 gowns, 2 pairs of shoes, 6 shifts, 1 cloak, my father's medical text, and 11 shillings. Mrs. Pritchard signed it when she helped carry my trunk downstairs. She placed it beside the key. Your correspondence is not among the articles. Paper can be hidden. Then search my rooms. Lady Brackenmere looked toward Peregrine. Your Grace, surely you will not permit this woman to insult me beneath your roof. Peregrine's gaze remained on Marian. Miss Bell has not yet asked me to speak. The county gentleman shifted. One coughed into his fist. Marian's shoulders lowered by a fraction. She turned back to the Countess. You withheld £9 and 10 shillings in wages. You threatened my reference. You wrote to destroy employment I had not yet secured. Now you have crossed 40 miles to accuse me of theft before the man whose notice you feared I had attracted. Marian pushed the brass key across the table until it stopped before Lady Brackenmere's glove. Take it. Open every drawer. When you find your letters, send my wages to the little fallow school. Lavinia's face flushed beneath the white swansdown. You think yourself important because he has indulged you. No, Marian's voice remained low. I think the work important. That is the difference between us. Lady Brackenmere turned to Peregrine. You cannot believe her. I saw her leave. His words fell without heat. I stood at the servants' gate before dawn. Her trunk was closed. Mrs. Pritchard was present in the passage when it was carried down. Miss Bell took no packet from your house. You were watching her. Lavinia whispered. 4 weeks. Peregrine released the chair and crossed to Marian's side. Long enough to know that if she wished to injure your family, she would not require stolen letters. She would need only to describe it accurately. Silence gathered beneath the painted ceiling. Lady Brackenmere snatched up the key. Come, Lavinia. At the door, Marian spoke once more. My wages. The Countess did not turn. You will receive them. The school will. The door closed behind the women. Cold air from the corridor moved across the carpet, carrying the smell of wet wool and carriage mud. The 2 gentlemen stared at the fire. Peregrine dismissed them with a glance. When they had gone, Marian gathered the inventory and housekeeper's note. I did not know she had written to Canterbury, he said. I know. I did not arrange for you to have nowhere else to go. I know that too. Then why are you closing your notebook as though you mean to leave? Marian tied the ribbon around it. Because every kindness here bears your name. The carriage, the lodge, the wages, the workmen, the school. I came to prove I could stand alone and discovered that I am standing in the center of your estate. Peregrine's jaw tightened. The school would be yours to direct. And everyone would say I obtained it because a duke watched me. Let them. You can afford contempt. I must work beneath it. The firelight moved across his scar. For several heartbeats, only the clock sounded, brass gears clicking behind painted glass. What do you require? He asked. Marian looked toward the open door. A house in Little Fallow rented from the trust, not given by you. A salary fixed before witnesses. Authority recorded in writing. And no visits from you except upon school business unless I invite them. Peregrine's fingers opened at his side. You intend to leave the lodge. Tomorrow. Will you leave the estate? Not if you accept my terms. He crossed to the escritoire, sanded a sheet, and wrote while the pen scratched through the quiet. When he finished, he signed, rang for his steward, and had the terms witnessed before the fire had burned down by an inch. The next morning, Marian's trunk stood once more upon gravel. The air smelled of chimney soot and frost-burned grass. Peregrine watched from the steps as a farm cart carried her toward Little Fallow. He did not follow. He did not send a groom. He kept both hands behind his back until the cart vanished beyond the elms. In January, the old granary opened with 42 girls, 6 long tables, 3 stoves, and windows that admitted more light than wind. Chalk squeaked across new slates, wool cloak steamed near the door, fresh bread from the village oven scented the noon lesson. Marian taught accounts in the morning and letter writing after dinner. Peregrine attended trustees' meetings, sat at the far end of the table, and spoke only when asked. When he visited the classrooms, he waited on the threshold until Marian looked up and said, "Come in, Your Grace." Winter loosened. The river shed its grey skin of ice. Crocuses pressed through the churchyard, and the school's first account books filled with steady columns. Marian began to notice his restraint as once he had noticed her departures. He never entered her cottage without invitation. He never altered a school order. He sent questions through the trustees and accepted answers written in the margins. At the March County Assembly, Marian attended as mistress of the Westridge school rather than anyone's companion. The room smelled of beeswax and crushed violets, fiddles flashed beneath chandeliers, and satin shoes whispered over the floor. She remained near a pillar until Peregrine crossed the room and bowed. "Dance with me. Every person here will notice. They should have noticed you years ago." He offered his hand. Marian placed her fingers upon his glove. The country dance carried them apart and returned them, again and again, through warm candlelight and the bright scrape of strings. When the final figure ended, Marian instinctively turned toward the side door. Peregrine did not stop her. He merely watched. Her hand touched the knob. Then she looked back. He stood where she had left him, making no claim, leaving the length of the ballroom between them open. Marian released the knob and crossed that distance herself. "You said you watched because I always left." "At first." "And afterward?" The music softened behind them. Orange blossom from a lady's corsage mingled with the clean wool of his coat. "Afterward, I watched because I had never seen anyone choose a door so carefully." He drew a folded document from inside his coat. Marian did not take it. Another employment offer. A marriage settlement. Her brows rose. "You are remarkably fond of written terms. I have learned that spoken promises are too easy for powerful men to interpret in their own favor." He placed the document upon the pillar ledge. "The school remains under your direction. Your income remains yours. Your cottage remains yours if ever you wish to close a door upon me. I ask no answer tonight." Marian looked at the seal, then at him. "And if I leave?" His throat moved once. "I will watch you go." I will not make your freedom the price of my devotion. The fiddlers began a slower air. Marian opened the document, read the first page, crossed out one phrase with the pencil from her reticule, and wrote in the margin. Peregrine leaned closer. What have you changed? The cottage does not remain mine if I wish to close a door upon you. She handed him the paper. It remains mine whether the door is open or closed. His laugh broke low and warm beneath the chandeliers. Agreed. And the school admits 20 more girls next year. Agreed. And you will cease pretending that you first noticed me because of a pianoforte. That term may defeat me. Marian folded the settlement and placed it against his chest. Then tell the truth. Peregrine covered her hand with his. Around them, silk moved and glasses chimed, but his voice reached only her. I noticed you because everyone in that room looked at me, and you looked toward the broken thing. Marian's thumb rested over the beat beneath his waistcoat. I thought no one would notice me leaving. I noticed every time. Then notice this. She rose upon her toes and pressed a brief kiss to his cheek, close to the scar. The room seemed to inhale. Marian stepped back, took his arm, and turned not toward the side door but toward the center of the assembly. They married in June after the school's first public examination. Roses warmed in the chapel, and ink from Marian's certificate still marked her fingers. 42 girls crowded the rear pews. Marian entered through the great west door with no one directing her pace, while Peregrine watched as he had watched across every threshold between them. Her old trunk later stood beneath the window of her study, scarred at the corners. One door opened toward his library, the other toward Little Fallow. Neither was locked. On autumn mornings, Marian crossed the courtyard with school papers beneath her arm while leaves scraped gold across the stones. Peregrine often stood at an upper window, watching her depart. She always looked back now. Not because she needed permission to go, and not because she feared being forgotten, but because the man behind the glass had learned the difference between seeing a woman and possessing her. He lifted one hand. Marian lifted hers. Then she walked through the gate in full daylight, certain that she could leave any room in the world and still choose where she belonged.